The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the jagged silhouette of 70 Apache warriors positioned along the ridge, like dark sentinels against the dawn sky. Each rider sat motionless on his horse, and each held something that made Thomas Brennan's throat tighten with confusion, a single white feather that caught the first light of morning. Thomas touched his empty gun belt, not searching for the Colt that wasn't there, but seeking comfort that felt just as absent. His horse was gone, traded away yesterday, for reasons that seemed clear at the time, but now felt like the actions of a madman. The woman he'd helped Ayanna had whispered her gratitude before collapsing into fevered unconsciousness. Now, she was nowhere among the mounted figures watching him from above. The silence stretched between them, like a taut rope ready to snap. Thomas had expected war cries, arrows, the swift justice that came to white men foolish enough to cross into Apache territory uninvited. Instead, they simply watched him with the patience of vultures, their white feathers creating an eerie contrast against the harsh landscape. Behind the lead warrior, something metallic caught the sunlight. Thomas squinted and felt his blood turn cold. The man wore a necklace of small bones, and hanging from his belt was a scalp of brown hair that matched Thomas's own color exactly. Yet the warrior's eyes held no bloodlust, no anger, only expectation, as if Thomas was supposed to understand something that remained completely beyond his grasp. The memory of yesterday burned in Thomas's mind like a brand. He'd been riding through Devil's Canyon when the soft moan echoed off the rock walls, too human to ignore. Following the sound, he'd found Ayanna collapsed beside a dried creek bed, blood seeping through makeshift bandages around her thigh. The wound was infected fever, making her skin burn to the touch, her breathing shallow and desperate. Any sensible man would have ridden on. Apache territory meant death for trespassers, and helping one of their women could be interpreted as theft or worse. But something in Ayanna's dark eyes had reminded him of his younger sister's final moments, that same resigned dignity in the face of approaching death. Without a word, Thomas had lifted Ayanna onto his horse. She was too weak to protest, drifting in and out of consciousness as he led the animal on foot through the rocky terrain. For 8 grueling hours he'd walked beside his mount, while she slumped in the saddle, occasionally whispering words in Apache that sounded like prayers. When they'd finally reached the edge of Apache territory, marked by 3 distinctive red stones, he'd helped her down and watched her stumble toward the traditional dwellings scattered across the valley floor. Then he'd done something that still made no sense. Instead of reclaiming his horse, he'd slapped the animal's flank and sent it after her. The horse had followed Ayanna like a faithful dog, and Thomas had stood there empty-handed, watching his most valuable possession disappear into enemy land. Now, 18 hours later, his legs ached from walking through the night. His water was nearly gone, and 70 Apache warriors treated him like a puzzle they needed to solve before deciding whether to kill him or let him live. The lead warrior raised his hand slightly. The others responded instantly, shifting their horses into a new formation, not threatening, but calculated, like pieces moving across a chessboard, according to rules Thomas had never learned. The gray-haired man began descending the ridge, still holding his white feather. The others remained motionless, but Thomas felt their attention like a physical weight pressing against his chest. As the warrior approached, Thomas noticed more unsettling details. The man's war paint was applied with ceremonial precision, and his horse's bridle was decorated with symbols that seemed to tell a story. When he stopped 10 feet away, the warrior spoke a single word in Apache, his voice carrying an odd note of reverence that made Thomas's skin crawl. The Apache word hung between them like a challenge Thomas couldn't meet. He cleared his throat and tried the universal language of peace, raising both hands slowly. "I don't want trouble. I helped your woman because she was hurt. That's all." The warrior tilted his head, as if Thomas had said something interesting, but wrong. He repeated the Apache word this time, placing his hand over his heart and gesturing toward the valley where Ayanna had disappeared. When Thomas still showed no understanding, the warrior did something that chilled his blood. He smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the smile of a man who knew a secret that would change everything. From somewhere behind, Thomas came a new sound singing. High voices weaving together in harmony that raised the hair on his arms. But this wasn't a war song. He'd heard Apache war chants before, and they sounded nothing like this melody that carried celebration gratitude, and something else he couldn't identify. Something that sounded almost like mourning. The warrior noticed Thomas's confusion and nodded approvingly, as if the ignorance was exactly what he'd expected. He reached into a leather pouch and pulled out an object that made Thomas's stomach drop his horse's bridle, the one custom-made with distinctive silver conchos his father had given him. But the leather was decorated now with painted symbols that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. The warrior held up the bridle and spoke in Apache, pointing at Thomas, then at the symbols, then back at Thomas. The meaning was unmistakable. These markings represented something about what Thomas had done, something significant enough to bring 70 warriors to witness. From the ridge, the singing grew stronger. More voices joined the harmony from somewhere Thomas couldn't see. When he turned around, his heart nearly stopped. Emerging from a hidden canyon was a procession of Apache women and children, led by an elderly man, wearing an elaborate feathered headdress that marked him as someone of supreme importance. Walking beside the elder, moving slowly due to her injured leg, was Ayanna. She was conscious now, alert, and staring directly at Thomas with an expression that mixed gratitude with something that looked disturbingly like pity. The elderly man approached with steps that suggested ceremony and purpose. His weathered face carried authority that came from decades of making decisions affecting entire tribes. When he spoke, his voice transcended language barriers, conveying deep emotion that needed no translation. Ayanna limped forward and addressed Thomas in careful English, her accent thick, but words clear. "My grandfather wishes to thank the white man who gave life back to his granddaughter." Thomas felt his confusion deepen. "I just helped someone who was hurt. Anyone would have done the same." Ayanna translated his words. The elder listened intently, then responded in rapid Apache, his tone suggesting he was correcting something important. "My grandfather says you speak words that are not true," Ayanna explained. "Most men would not have helped. Most white men would have ridden past or worse. But you gave away your most valuable possession to save the life of an enemy. This is not what anyone would do. This follows the old codes." The elder placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder and spoke with deep reverence. Ayanna listened carefully before translating words that changed everything. "He says you have honored the sacred law of the horse gift. When a warrior gives his mount to save a life, he binds himself to that life and that life's people. You did not know this law, but ignorance does not change the binding. You are now connected to our tribe in ways that must be honored." Thomas's mouth went dry. "Connected, what does that mean exactly?" The singing stopped abruptly, creating ominous silence. The elder studied Thomas's face, then spoke a single word in Apache. Every warrior on the ridge responded by raising their white feathers high above their heads in what looked like a salute, but felt like something more final. Ayanna's expression grew troubled. "The connection requires a choosing. Sacred law demands that the giver of the horse gift must prove whether his heart truly matches his actions. If yes, he joins the tribe as family. If no—" She paused, glancing nervously at the armed warriors surrounding them. "If no what?" Thomas asked, dreading the answer. "If no, the gift was a lie and lies about sacred things must be punished. You would be marked as one who steals honor through false generosity." Thomas looked around at the 70 warriors, the elder's unwavering gaze, Ayanna's worried face. He was trapped between two choices he didn't understand, both of which would change his life forever. The Apache village was hidden in a natural basin between towering rock formations, its traditional dwellings arranged in patterns that spoke of generations of careful planning. What struck Thomas most was the complete absence of hostility. Children watched him with open curiosity. Women nodded respectfully as he passed, and men studied him with expressions that suggested they were measuring something he couldn't identify. You wonder why no one shows fear or anger toward a white man in their sacred place, Ayanna observed as they walked deeper into the village. Thomas nodded. The thought crossed my mind. Fear and anger are for enemies. You are not yet enemy, and you are not yet family. You are between worlds, which makes you sacred, until the choosing ceremony reveals your true nature. They approached a dwelling larger than the others, decorated with symbols that seemed to tell stories Thomas couldn't read. The elder waited inside, seated on a woven mat with various objects laid out before him. Thomas recognized his horse's bridle among them, but there were other items too: an ornate knife with carved bone handle, a clay pot filled with dark paint, and a bundle of sage tied with sinew. The elder gestured for Thomas to sit across from him. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ritual and ancient tradition. Ayanna translated carefully, pausing frequently to ensure accuracy. He says the choosing ceremony has 3 parts. First, you must demonstrate that your gift came from genuine caring, not from seeking advantage or glory. Second, you must show that you understand the sacred nature of sacrifice by making one yourself. Third, you must prove that you can put the welfare of the tribe above your own survival. Thomas felt cold sweat form, despite the dwelling's warmth. What kind of sacrifice? And how exactly do I prove that last part? The elder seemed to understand English better than he spoke it, because he responded before Ayanna could translate. He picked up the ornate knife and held it so the blade caught light filtering through the entrance. Then he spoke in Apache, his tone grave and ceremonial. Ayanna's face went pale as she listened. When she translated, her voice barely rose above a whisper. The sacrifice is a test of trust. You must allow yourself to be bound and placed in a situation where only the tribe's mercy will save your life. If your original gift was pure, they will save you. If it was false, they will let you die as punishment for dishonoring sacred laws. Thomas stared at the knife, understanding. Now why the 70 warriors had seemed so calm and expectant. They weren't here to fight him. They were here to judge him. And depending on that judgment, they would either welcome him as family or watch him die for the crime of false generosity. The elder set down the knife and picked up the clay pot. He dipped his finger in the paint and drew a symbol on his own forehead, then offered the pot to Thomas. The message was clear. The ceremony was already beginning, whether Thomas was ready or not. Outside, the sun had moved considerably toward the western horizon. Thomas realized with growing dread that he had perhaps 2 hours to decide whether to submit to a test that could easily kill him or try to flee across open country on foot while being pursued by 70 mounted warriors. A commotion outside caught his attention. Through the dwelling's entrance, he could see Apache men arranging stones in a large circle, while women wove long ropes from plant fibers. Children gathered specific types of wood. Thomas didn't recognize everyone moving with fluid efficiency of people who had performed these tasks many times before. How often does this happen? Thomas asked Ayanna. The horse gift ceremony. Not often. Maybe once in a generation, if ever. Most people are not foolish enough to give away their only means of survival for a stranger. She paused, studying his face. Or brave enough. 3 young warriors approached, carrying what looked like ceremonial clothing. The elder spoke to them briefly, then turned back to Thomas. Through Ayanna, he explained that Thomas must wear traditional Apache clothing during the ceremony, as his own garments represented the world he was choosing to leave behind. As Thomas changed clothes, he noticed the 70 warriors from the ridge had positioned themselves around the village perimeter. They were no longer watching him specifically, but their presence created an unmistakable message. There would be no escape once the ceremony began. The sun touched the horizon as Thomas found himself seated in the center of the stone circle, hands bound behind his back, with rope that felt stronger than leather. The entire village had gathered around the perimeter, their faces illuminated by torches that cast dancing shadows across the assembled crowd. The 70 warriors formed an outer ring still, as sentinels their white feathers moving gently in the evening breeze. 5 elders sat facing Thomas, each wearing elaborate paint designs that marked their status as judges in this ancient proceeding. Ayana's grandfather occupied the center position, flanked by 2 men and 2 women, whose weathered faces spoke of decades spent making life-and-death decisions for their people. The questioning began gently. Why had he been in Apache territory? Thomas explained about searching for new grazing land after drought had destroyed his small ranch. Where was his family? Gone, he told them honestly. Parents dead from fever, sister from complications in childbirth, no wife or children of his own. Then the questions became more pointed. Had he helped Ayana hoping to gain something from the Apache people? Thomas denied this, explaining that he'd expected nothing but trouble from his actions. Did he consider himself a good man who deserved reward for his kindness? This question made Thomas pause because he wasn't sure how to answer honestly. I don't know if I'm good, he finally said. I just know that leaving someone to die when I could help felt wrong. The female elder to his left spoke in rapid Apache, her tone sharp and challenging. Ayana translated reluctantly. She asks why you did not try to take me to your own people for medical care. Why give me to the Apache when you could have been seen as a hero among whites for saving me? The question cut to something Thomas hadn't fully examined in his own mind. Because she belonged with her own people. Taking her away from everything she knew would have been another kind of cruelty. The male elder to his right leaned forward and spoke a single sentence in Apache. Ayana's eyes widened as she translated. He says, You speak of cruelty, but you condemned yourself to walk 20 miles through dangerous country, with no horse, no weapons, and little water. Was this kindness to yourself or punishment for some guilt you carry? The question hit Thomas like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind, his sister's face as she died, because he couldn't get her to a doctor in time, his parents' graves that he'd abandoned when the ranch failed, all the times he'd chosen the safe path instead of the right one. Maybe both, he whispered, the honesty surprising him. The 5 elders spoke among themselves in voices too low to hear. Thomas watched their faces, trying to read expressions that revealed nothing. Finally, Ayana's grandfather stood and addressed the crowd in ceremonial tones that carried across the entire village. When he finished speaking, Ayana approached Thomas with tears in her eyes. You have passed the first test. The elders believe your heart was true when you helped me. She paused, wiping her face. But now comes the test of sacrifice, and I must warn you what they are about to ask. Even I do not know if I could do it. 2 young Apache men approached Thomas with a wooden box that they set down beside him, with reverent care. When Ayana's grandfather opened it, Thomas saw the contents and felt his blood turn cold. Inside were 5 arrows, each marked with a different colored band, and a small piece of leather painted with symbols. The elder lifted one piece of leather and showed it to the crowd, speaking in ceremonial tones that carried across the silent village. The test of sacrifice requires you to choose which member of our tribe will face danger to prove your worthiness. Ayana said, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 of our people have volunteered to risk their lives for your ceremony. The arrows represent different trials, each dangerous but survivable if the person is skilled and blessed with luck. Thomas stared at the arrows, horrified. I'm supposed to choose someone else to risk their life for me. That's not sacrifice. That's cruelty. That is exactly the point, Ayana replied. The test measures whether you will allow others to suffer for your benefit, or whether you will find another way. Many who take this test choose an arrow immediately, thinking that someone else's risk is acceptable payment for their own acceptance into the tribe. The elder spoke again, and Ayanna continued translating. But there is another choice. You can refuse to select an arrow and instead offer to face all 5 trials yourself. This has never been done because no one can survive all 5 trials alone. It would be certain death. Around the circle, Thomas could see 5 Apache volunteers standing ready. A young man, barely out of boyhood, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, an older warrior with scars marking his arms, a teenage girl who reminded him painfully of his dead sister, and a man about his own age, with a wife and small children visible in the crowd behind him. "What are the trials?" Thomas asked, though he suspected the answer wouldn't help his decision. Ayanna pointed to each arrow in turn. The red arrow means crossing the rapids at Devil's Canyon at night. The black arrow means entering the cave where the mountain cat dens and retrieving a stone from the deepest chamber. The white arrow means climbing the cliff face that no one has successfully climbed in living memory. The yellow arrow means walking alone into the territory of the rival tribe that killed 3 of our people last spring and returning with proof of peaceful contact. The blue arrow means— She paused, her voice breaking slightly. The blue arrow means allowing yourself to be bitten by a rattlesnake and relying on traditional medicine to save your life. Each trial represented almost certain death, and Thomas was expected to choose which innocent person would die for his acceptance into a tribe he'd never asked to join. The 70 warriors watched from their positions around the village perimeter, their white feathers now seeming less like decoration and more like markers for a funeral that hadn't yet happened. Thomas closed his eyes and thought about his sister's final words. She'd told him that real courage wasn't about being unafraid, but about doing what was right, even when fear consumed you. She'd also said that some things were worth dying for, and protecting innocent people was at the top of that list. When he opened his eyes, Thomas looked directly at Ayanna's grandfather. "I won't choose an arrow. If someone has to face these trials for my acceptance, it will be me. All 5 trials. Tonight." The elder's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes that might have been respect. The crowd murmured in surprise, and the 5 volunteers looked at Thomas with expressions ranging from relief to amazement. But it was the reaction of the 70 warriors that surprised him most, as when they removed the white feathers from their horses' bridles and raised them high above their heads, creating a forest of pale plumes against the darkening sky. Ayanna's grandfather rose slowly, his weathered face showing deep emotion as he studied Thomas's resolute expression. The elder spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the silent village with absolute authority. When he finished, the 70 warriors responded with a sound Thomas had never heard before, a low rhythmic chant that seemed to come from the earth itself. Ayanna stepped forward, tears streaming down her face as she translated her grandfather's words. He says, "No man in the history of our people has ever offered to face all 5 trials alone. Such willingness to die rather than cause harm to innocent people proves a heart that is already Apache, whether the blood runs Apache or not." The elder continued speaking, and his next words caused visible shock among the assembled crowd. Ayanna's voice shook as she translated. He says, "The trials are ended. You have already passed the test of sacrifice by proving you would rather die than allow others to suffer for your benefit. The horse gift law is satisfied, and you are declared brother to our tribe." Thomas felt confusion mixed with relief. "But I haven't actually done anything yet. I just said I would." The elder smiled for the first time since Thomas had met him. Through Ayanna, he explained, "The trials exist to reveal the heart, not to cause death. A man who chooses certain death over possible harm to others has shown his heart completely. No further proof is needed." What happened next took Thomas's breath away. The 70 warriors dismounted in perfect unison and began walking toward the stone circle. As they approached, each one knelt and placed his white feather at Thomas's feet, then removed something from his belt or saddle pack. Thomas watched in amazement as a pile of offerings grew before him. Beautifully crafted knives, hand-woven blankets, carved jewelry. Finally, one warrior brought forth Thomas's own horse, now wearing new Apache tack, decorated with symbols of honor and respect. The lead warrior, the same gray-haired man who had first approached Thomas that morning, stepped forward and spoke in careful English. "White brother, we came here to witness judgment. We expected to take a body away for burial or to escort a new tribal member to our camps in the mountains. We did not expect to meet a man worthy of the greatest honor our people can bestow." "What honor?" Thomas asked, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. The warrior smiled. "You are invited to carry the protection of 70 families. Each feather represents a warrior's pledge that your safety is as important as the safety of his own children. Each gift represents a household that will shelter you, feed you, and defend you as long as you live. This has been given to only 3 white men in all our history, and never before to a man who was not born among us." Ayana's grandfather approached Thomas and placed both hands on his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of sacred ceremony. Through his granddaughter, he said, "You came to us as a stranger who gave a gift. You leave as a brother who received 70 gifts in return. Your horse was returned with honor markings that will ensure safe passage through any Apache territory. But more than that, you have shown our people that some white men understand the true meaning of courage and sacrifice." Thomas mounted his horse, feeling the weight of 70 white feathers tied to his saddle, and the warmth of acceptance he had never expected to find. As he prepared to leave the village, the entire tribe gathered to see him off, their faces showing respect that would have been impossible to imagine just hours before. Ayana approached his horse one final time. "Where will you go now, brother?" Thomas looked toward the horizon where his old life waited, then back at the Apache village where he had discovered something about himself he never knew existed. "I think I'll head north toward the mountains. I hear there's good grazing land up there, and it seems I have some new neighbors to get to know." The 70 warriors mounted their horses and formed an honor escort as Thomas rode out of the village. Their presence around him felt like protection, family, and home all at once. The white feathers on his saddle caught the starlight, marking him forever as a man who had been tested by fire and emerged as something greater than he had ever imagined possible. Behind him, the Apache village settled into peaceful night, but the bonds forged in that stone circle would last a lifetime. Thomas had given away a horse to save a life, and in return, he had received something infinitely more valuable, a place where he belonged, earned not through blood or birth, but through the simple recognition that some things mattered more than survival itself. The desert stretched endlessly before him now, but it no longer felt empty or threatening. It felt like the beginning of everything he was meant to become.